The Connolly's Red Mill story started over a century ago, and for 5 generations, the Connolly family have blended science, passion, and experience to craft premium horse and animal feeds, elevating equine nutrition all over the world. They've consistently pursued excellence in the nutrition environment, and their commitment to quality is absolutely unwavering. In 2012, the Connolly's Red Mills team joined forces with Foreign Healthcare, broadening their scope to include equine, pet, and agri-supplements, and the collaboration transformed the company into a nutritional powerhouse dedicated to their continued research and development. Then, a few years later, in 2020, the Red Mills family, their commitment to horse and animal well-being expanded even further as they welcomed Cardet and Martin into the fold. A renowned international name in horse care solutions, their products for leather care, hoof care, coat care, and healthcare are unrivaled in the market, boasting a loyal following of lifelong advocates. All of the manufacturing occurs in County Kilkenny, running across 3 sites, including the HQ in Goresbridge, with absolutely nothing outsourced. This means that there is unwavering consistency in both quality and supply, and Connolly's Red Mills, along with Foreign Equine and Cardet and Martin, always place your horse at the centre of everything that they do.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London and to the games of the 30th Olympiad.
Let the games begin.
22 nations, 13 teams and 74 competitors. Now, Michael Young, I think everybody would possibly agree that could well be the favourite here. That is a decisive round for Germany, because that clear round for Michael Young takes Germany now well into the lead. A brilliant round there for Tina Cook, and she is over the moon with that. Germany stay in front. Britain once again the bridesmaids. New Zealand a good result for them, and a lovely result for Sweden to be 4th.
Okay, so we've covered in part 1 of the Olympic specials of London, listeners, with Alec Lahore as event director of the eventing, and also Sue Benson, who designed the course for the cross country. A lot more about the build up and a lot more about the sort of organisational aspect of it. Now we are going to get into what the games were actually like, from both a journalist perspective with Kate Green and Catherine Austen, but then a rider's perspective. Tina Cook and Nicola Wilson, part of the British team who won a team silver in London. I think that is one of my favourite conversations that we have had on the show actually in quite some time. Absolutely love it. But we're going to start with Kate and Catherine. And I think, Dee, this is again where the successful word comes back, reporting on a home games. It's not just kind of a bucket list thing for the athletes, all of the professionals involved in the sport. This is their Olympic Games as well.
I mean, so I talked about, I think on the Athens show, Nicole, how Kate Green is the OG. And
you love Kate Green, don't you?
Yeah. I love her more having listened to it, which is why I wanted to this again when we spoke to Jane about doing these series. Like, I love her more now because I got to, look or hear the story of why it all and how it all. What I was going to say though, Nicole, is I think what Kate Green does in Athens, or the kind of becoming the center point of Athens. There's something very special about her then being part of such a central part of London, but equally, I think the same for Catherine. Like, what are we now? 12 years on from London. I think it's kind of funny when you hear it that like Catherine is such an integral part of shows like Alphabetti Spaghetti, and has so much kind of lightness to her. She's so approachable and fun. And I've always, in my time in the sport, I've kind of gotten to know Catherine as like a friend maybe first, and then someone who knows everything. When actually you hear this, and then it builds on the person that you see running burly kind of full media operation. You know what she's achieved and continues to do with Horse and Hound in our sport and in racing. In the same way as it did for me with Kate, I think it showed me and reminded me like of the heft and the power and the privilege that we have of having Catherine as part of our podcast team.
An enormous amount of experience, and between them, I think they capture London extremely well. So let's hear what they have to say. Okay, the magic of reporting on a home Olympic Games. Nothing quite like it. The inside story. Kate Green is back. Kate, lovely to have you back on the show. And we also have, so Kate was working in the press office in London and had passed the reporting handle over, and she was in charge of reporting all three disciplines in London, our very own Catherine Austen. First of all, I want to take you back to the moment that you realised there was going to be a home Olympic Games and actually what that felt like for you, Kate.
That was a very exciting moment. I was working for Blenheim Horse Trials at the time, and we were in the office when the news came through. And Mike Etherington-Smith, who was the event director, he was out at the time. And when he got back, Georgie and I, who were working in the office, we had created the Olympic rings in Smarties all over the floor of the office. This is the kind of thing we got up to, really professional. But it did feel sort of very exciting. I mean, at that moment, we didn't know whether any of us would have any involvement in it. Although I was pretty determined from that second on that I was going to have some involvement. But yeah, no, it was a great moment.
I was going to say, having reported on the Olympics that you had reported on to this point, to getting a home Olympic Games, it would have been a travesty if you hadn't been involved in some way, shape or form. Catherine, how about you? Any Smarties on the floor?
I don't remember the announcement at all, actually. I've literally no recollection of it, which is strange. What I remember is when the build-up began, really. I mean, there was quite a lot of dissension about the venue, about Greenwich, and whether it was a suitable place for horse sports, whether the cross-country could work there. Why wasn't it at Windsor? All this kind of stuff. And it wasn't until the test event, which I reported for Horse and Hound, so the summer of 2011, that we actually understood that it was going to be unbelievably good and it was going to be amazing and it would work. And yes, it was totally different to, our normal events. It was completely different to Badminton and Burghley, but it was going to be very special. And they brought in loads and loads of local school children for the test event. And it gave it an extraordinary atmosphere. Do you remember, Kate?
Yes, it was fun, wasn't it? And there were also there was also a bit of local dissent. Piggy French, now March, won the test event. Yeah. And there was a sign saying, Piggy, go home.
She's spoken about this sign.
Yeah, I think she's got the sign.
Yes.
I remember her father really wanting to buy it. And there was also the pub there, the Greenwich Tavern, which became such a fantastic place. Absolutely, which made it, such a great Olympics, actually, the pub, really. And they were sort of very baffled by these sort of hefty drinking riders pouring in and demanding jugs of Pimm's, and they just couldn't keep up. And I remember saying to them, you are going to have to get in more staff this time next year. And to their absolute credit, they did, and they were so welcoming, and they really opened the doors. And in fact, the pub became renamed the Golden Saddle for the duration of the Olympics. And we would all stand outside waving lorries in and out. Michael Young had his 30th birthday, I think, the day he departed. And so we all sang happy birthday to him. It all became, a fantastic atmosphere. I was a bit worried because I lived in Greenwich for the duration of the games, and I was a bit worried wandering around in my purple Games Maker t-shirt, whether I'd get sort of, tomatoes chucked at me by shopkeepers, because they were unhappy about, the closure of streets and their park and things. And in fact, it was fine, and the pubs were all fine, and the locals were very nice to us. And it had a good feel.
I was going to say, had they got over it by the time the event came around? It sounds like they had. I'm not going to lie, listeners. Obviously, we want the inside line on reporting on a home Olympic Games, but I feel like the best stories are going to have come out of the Golden Saddle, to be quite honest. And that is what we're here for.
Kate knows more about Olympic reporting than I do, but from what I learned and what I know, actually Olympics are very difficult to report. It's very restricted. It's very difficult to get anywhere, see anyone, do anything. And we're not used to that in horse sport. We're used to huge access, very privileged access, being able to pretty much go anywhere, anytime. People even surprised, I think, Kate, when people wanted to walk the course at previous Olympics and that sort of thing. But London was completely different. It was staffed by everyone we know. And the fact that this pub, the Greenwich Tavern, was on the very corner of the park, it became this melting pot of officials, riders, journalists, media people working at the event, and spectators as well. I don't think there's ever been, or probably will be, an Olympics again with the mixing of all of the participants like that.
Yes, I remember. And also it was great for families who hadn't got any accreditation. So I remember meeting Sam Watson's parents outside the fence. And I met up with his sister, Susanna, and I hadn't seen her since I was her nanny when she was about 2. And so it was brilliant for that kind of thing. And because, well, in fact, he didn't ride in the end in London, but they'd obviously, come in expectation. And there were lots of people like that who had no hope of getting into the grounds, but they could still be part of it and meet up with everyone, and that's what made it so special.
Yeah, I remember Mark Todd the night after, cross country night, having a pint in the pub. And as for what happened when the show jumpers won their gold medal, I know this is an eventing podcast. That got completely out of hand.
Yeah, no, we need that story. We need that story a little bit later on. We're going to talk about the success in a bit. It always feels like, and this sometimes I think stereotypically British to a degree, that there's sort of an expectation of failure, isn't there? And like the dissent amongst using Greenwich Park, that people kind of didn't want to see it fail, but there's a bit of sort of that negative attitude. What was the feeling like from the mainstream media in particular in that sort of build up to the games? Did it feel like that, or had by that point we all sort of got behind?
I think they largely ignored it, to be honest, until they suddenly descended during the games, when it became clear that not only was Greenwich a stunningly beautiful and successful venue, but that also we were winning medals. Obviously, the inclusion of Zara on an Olympic team meant that a load of quite hardened male sports journalists, bearing in mind this is a few years ago now, sort of descended in a slightly grumpy, slightly patronizing way. And I remember them, as ever, saying to Zara, what does it feel like to know that your grandmother, i.e. the Queen, is watching you? And she just looked at them and said, it's the Olympics. Everyone's grandmother is watching them. Which is completely fair enough. And because it had been quite slippery out on the tight track, I really needed to ask her a question about what studs her horse was wearing. So I felt very, very horsey at that point, and I had to be very sharp elbowed to get through these kind of rugby and football journalists and battle my way to ask what I thought was a really quite important for Horse and Hound question. I can't remember in what order it happened, but the dressage team gold was one of the first British golds of the game.
Hadn't we waited a couple of days? Everybody had sort of started to get a bit twitchy that we hadn't won a medal yet, or a gold medal yet.
Yeah, you might be right. And it was either the first or nearly the first. I think one did come in before it. So suddenly there was a lot of attention. And I also remember Carl Hester just having, again, these quite hardened equestrian is, feeble journalists. He had them eating out of the palm of his hand, as ever. So we were all very proud of him.
So talk us through, Kate, your role at the Olympics. What did working in the press office look like, and where were you based, I presume, out of the press office for the majority of it?
We had the poshest press office in London because it was part of the Maritime Museum. So there was a mural behind the desk, and it was absolutely terrific. To the side of it, you walked out into sort of archways of Greenwich and the Naval College. So it was pretty smart. It was so much better than I expected. Throughout all my Games Maker interviews, which were all sort of very, very hearty, and they were all things things like, so Catherine, how are you going to go the extra mile? And we were also sort of slightly encouraged to not to exceed our brief, that we were literally there to sort of unlock lockers and do the photocopying and things like that. And I was pretty resigned to that. But in fact, because we had so many media coming, because it was so accessible, I interviewed Sebastian Coe in the run-up to the games, and when there was dissent about Greenwich, and he said, look, you are going to get so much more media coming to report on equestrian sports than in any other games, because they're going to be able to nip over the river and do it. And this is what happened. And myself and Ellie Hughes and Claire Boardman were behind the front desk. And we were marking journalists' copy. There was a journalist from The Guardian had been assigned. He's normally a music and culture journalist. And he was assigned to a fortnight in Greenwich. And a very good journalist, Stephen Moss, but he didn't want to get things wrong. And so, we marked his work on a daily basis. We went to fetch people for interviews from next door, where all the supporters were gathered, which was just through a side door. And regularly we had journalists turning up, and they'd come from the fencing or something, and they said, look, what's happening? What is this dressage? We were tit-upping around the press office, showing what the difference between Piaffe and Packard. And it was, yes, you felt it was so much better than I expected. It was a brilliant fortnight.
Met so many, other journalists from all over the world, and journalists from other, sports, other disciplines, other everything really, that we just don't come across.
It was truly inspiring from that point of view.
All of that probably underlines the main reason for having it in Greenwich and having it as part of, the wider Olympic event, and not having it, at an established venue already, and kind of having people travel out where it would have been on the outskirts. And yes, you'd had a bit of coverage with the success, but it wouldn't have been nearly the same. Catherine, from your side, reporting on the three different disciplines, Kate did say, actually, when we just jumped on this call, Catherine hit the jackpot, because Kate, you spent four Olympics, I think, waiting for success in kind of eventing.
Went wrong. I spent quite a lot of time coming home and apologising, really, in Horse and Hound for, British disasters, notably in the dressage and show jumping. But yes, so Catherine, she just turns up and gets 3 gold medals.
I know. I was aware. It was by the shall I say, my esteemed elder peers, i.e. Kate, Jenny MacArthur, Alan Smith, those kind of legends, made it pretty clear that they didn't think this was entirely fair, and that I should have had to suffer plenty of disappointment as well as it. And it is, to be honest, it's so easy to write about success. It's really easy. You're carried along by it. Everyone wants to talk. They give you great quotes. Even the show jumpers gave great quotes, which is not something that happens that often. It's much, much easier to write about gold medals than it is to write about the team that came 5th.
Let's talk about the eventing specifically for a moment and how the competition unfolded, because actually, in terms of format, 5 in a team, best 3 scores to count. Again, as Kate and I said on one of the other shows, that feels like, I think it was the Athens show actually, feels like such a luxury now with 3 from 3, but you get 2 drop scores. The opportunities are endless. They were a fairly established British team, the likes of William Fox-Pitt, Zara Tindall, Nicola Wilson. Zara obviously brought a huge media presence herself, but actually from a names perspective, they were all very, very well established in the sport. How much pressure were the eventers under going into London?
Well, going into any Olympics comes with enormous pressure, and they'd won and won and won for years at Europeans, Worlds, all the rest of it. It was very much time for that team gold, for sure.
They were disappointed with their silver. They were deflated. And Yogi Breisner, who had been with them since 2000, he was deflated, as was Will Connell, who was head of the head of the mission sort of thing. They were definitely deflated by it, and it was hard for them, with the dressage and show jumping riders all sort of rushing in and out of TV studios and going on boat trips and things like that. So it was hard, definitely.
The first line of my report, which I dug out, is a quote from Mary King, which says, "Good for them. That means they've done a better job than us," said Mary King when asked how she felt about the Germans taking team gold. You can feel the strength of feeling behind that.
It was a very, very strong German team that actually ended up delivering. You had Peter Thompson, Dirk Schrader, but it was the Ingrid Klimke actually had Butts Abraxas, but Sandra Oforthop, Gunluvo, Michael Young, Lubiestatique Sam, like they sort of horses that actually Michael Young, Sam, had actually been the European and the world champion coming into the Olympic Games anyway, but kind of very much on the upward trajectory to go on to be absolute greats.
And Up Gunluvo became world champion. Yeah, they were hugely strong, and it's not quite the beginning of the Michael Young era, but near enough. And he was phenomenal. And he was 11th after dressage and totally unfazed by that. And he was 30 on the day that he won his gold medal.
And I think that was one of the sort of defining qualities, was that, an awful lot of riders who were already the, European champion and the world champion would have a bit of a tantrum at being 11th after dressage. And he would just get to the start of the cross country, shake the horse's reins and go, "Come on, this is going to be fun." And I think that is one of the elements of his personality that made him so successful.
Totally. And I mean, it was a lovely cross-country round. His reins were long practically, and it was a tight, difficult track. Not difficult in terms of size, but it wound round and round, and Sam just absolutely spun round it really impressively.
Yes, it was.
The crowd on Cross Country Day, Kate, because it was quite extraordinary how tightly jammed everyone was in. And you could hear where a Brit or a popular famous rider was on the course by the noise, because they cheered them as they approached, as they jumped the fence, and as they went away from the fence, and it echoed round the park in the most extraordinary way. And it wasn't always the easiest place to work, because there wasn't a telly in the mixed zone up at the cross country. And they might have got one later. And eventually I just had to go out onto the course and try and see stuff in the flesh, which isn't generally how you report big events, because you need to watch as much of it as possible. Therefore, it's on a screen. And you could just hear this echo going round and round. Oh, yeah, well, Mark Todd must be going all right, because they're cheering here, 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 and here. I've never heard anything like it.
And then it would come to an absolute crescendo as the rider came through the main arena, which was where we were in the press office. And so with the doors wide open, it was hot weather. And yes, so we'd be standing there. We did have, I'm very happy to report, there was a TV in the front of the press office. But yes, we'd run out and get a live burst. And it was just completely thrilling. And it was the culmination of so many years of discussion and such hard work. And it was a fantastic day.
Not everyone found the cross country easy. William and was it Lionheart?
Yes.
Had quite a few cross country time penalties. I mean, you look back and every single one of them could have won us or lost us the gold medal in different ways, which is always the case, really. But certainly William's very unexpected time penalties played a part in that.
Yes, and Toddy, his chances of another individual gold medal, they slipped away with cross-country time penalties. I seem to recall not everyone liked it, and there were mishaps. And, it was influential. I know that if you speak to Sue Benson, she will always feel that she wasn't able to make it quite difficult enough, and that she felt quite sad for the sort of riders of the calibre of Andrew Nicholson and people like that it wasn't testing enough for them. But it did produce a result, and it wasn't completely straightforward.
Yoshi led the dressage and then just sadly didn't sit back going over the drop.
It feels like, and this is something that I'm going to talk to Sue about, and we'll have her on this episode, listeners, because one of the things that I remember so clearly from London, obviously there had been so much talk about the event being in Greenwich and not being an established equestrian event. However, it made iconic photos.
Oh, yeah.
And Sue created this work of art that actually then went on to be a legacy at other events, and these fences went to other events.
I was going to say, in terms of fence decoration, it is definitely the most beautifully decorated track I've ever seen. I remember the sort of Winds and the Willows decorations and all this very beautiful sort of pastoral, rural British thing. And of course, the stars and the moon and all the fences that went on to other events for quite a long time afterwards. And the picture of the moon on the sort of brow of the hill looking out over London with riders jumping, that was, I suppose, the iconic image of the equestrian events.
It was Alan Lee, who was he's the late racing editor of the Times. He was appointed a sort of games inspector, a venue inspector, and he went round all the different venues and he rated Greenwich the best of the lot.
Okay, that's a pretty cool job.
The main arena was extraordinary because it was built on a platform. And again, could it be done? Could it be done? And it jumped brilliantly, didn't it? But there was an awful lot of discussion about it beforehand.
Yes, after the test event, there was quite a lot of huffing and puffing, most notably by the show jumpers rather than the eventers. But yes, and that came off as well.
In that case, then, we've talked about the crowds and the atmosphere on Cross Country Day. What were the crowds and the atmosphere like in the stadium for the dressage?
Well, again, it's not exclusive to London, this Olympic problem, which is you get corporate block books of, bookings of seats. And so there were quite big holes in the crowd early on, which of course made the British public furious because they desperately wanted to be there. But that's not really something the Olympics can control very well, because if corporate bookings are made and not taken up, what do you do about it? But I think, Kate, you'd remember more because I was dashing about writing. But I think they did manage to repurpose those tickets, didn't they? Because it was certainly rammed by further on through the games.
Yes, as the each competition came to a climax, it was certainly rammed, and I would think some of the it must have been quite startling for some of the dressage riders. I stayed on afterwards for the weekend after the equestrian events, which is when the pentathlon took place, and that was extraordinary. I was there for the last medal of the games, which was the individual women's pentathlon, and so people we'd had the show jumping obviously in the arena, but the shooting was in the arena, and so runners were the athletes were running round the park and then running into the arena, shooting, and then running again in a great sort of circuit, and that was completely fantastic. And the shouting and roaring and the climax as people came into the arena was, that was terrific. I never thought it would be. I stayed on slightly reluctantly, but I was really glad I did, because it just brought the whole games to a sort of wonderful climax. And it was the last medal. And so Claire Balding came down and did a great big piece with games makers up on top of the hill, up at the observatory looking out over London. It was a very memorable ending to an extraordinary fortnight.
I remember so clearly how, I think this was really more during the show jumping or during the sort of the climaxes of each competition. But people didn't just clap and cheer. They also rattled their feet. They stamped their feet on the grandstands, and the noise and it was the atmosphere, and the noise was just, I've said extraordinary about 1 million times so far, but it was properly electric. And this crescendo of sound, I mean, the horses seemed to be perfectly all right, but it was quite something. The feet banging on the stands.
The sort of culmination of the individual competition, the eventers got the team silver. The second round of individual jumping, which obviously decided the individual medals, Michael Young, as you say, had been sort of climbing up the leaderboard, getting closer and closer. But it was actually Sarah Algotsson-Ossolts of Sweden who was the kind of the heartbreak story. And am I right in saying it was the final fence?
Yes, it was. horse caught it with hind legs, I think. Yes, it was pretty hard.
Yeah, lovely grey horse, young horse, and Sarah is a very popular rider and was very successful at that time. And also from a nation that, Sweden are a good equestrian nation, but they don't win Olympic gold medals. Well, they haven't done for a long time anyway. So and she would have become the first woman to win the eventing, which of course then didn't happen till, Julia some years later. So yeah.
Petrus Kastenman, for interest, listeners, won individual gold and Illuster in Stockholm 56. Also won, actually, Hans von Blixen-Finecke Jr. won in Helsinki 52, but they were the only sort of Swedish, long time ago, different sport. Right, the jumpers. Because we've kind of talked about the eventing, but the jumpers and the dressage riders, Charlotte Dujardin, the dance horses.
Do the dressage first, because that's how it came, and that was, to be honest, more expected. They'd won the Europeans the year before. I mean, we're used to Britain doing well in dressage now. We've had this glorious period of it, but wow, the idea of
we didn't used to do well. We didn't used to do well.
And, genuinely, it was amazing, and obviously totally captained by Carl Hester, who was the backbone of everything. Don't forget Laura Bechtolsheimer's brilliant performances as well, because she possibly gets slightly overlooked now, but she actually, on that wonderful horse, was winning and doing very well slightly before that, the Carl and Charlotte duo of Vallegro and Utopia. And I mean, as for Vallegro and Charlotte's Kerr freestyle, that British music, and it was so emotional. So yes, we had the dressage, they won. Wow,
The Dutch were furious, though. Do you remember in the individual?
Absolutely livid.
They were absolutely hopping mad, and Stephen Clark
were absolutely tampered.
Why were they mad? What happened?
Well, the Dutch rider Adelinda Cornelissen, and what was her horse called? Was it Parseval?
Yeah,
they were a big chestnut horse. They were expected. Well, they were kind of joint favourites with Charlotte, I suppose. So Stephen Clark, who was a judge, he had to explain at a rather heated press conference to the Dutch journalists why Charlotte had won, and it was for the softness of her presentation. And actually, the year before, the German journalists had all said to me, they said, "Oh, Kate, you should have been in Rotterdam," which is where they won their European. They said, "Your riders were they were there. They were so lovely and soft with their hands, and they set completely new standards of horsemanship to which the sport should aspire to." And I think that's quite an sort of important thing to say about 2012, because it did change what judges were looking for, and Carl and the team very much led that way of
very
riding.
much so. And it was a total sea change between very hot, very powerful, hard to hold horses, and a softer, freer presentation. But yes, it wasn't always popular, and it wasn't always agreed with. And Stephen Clark was wonderful. He was absolutely fantastic at explaining why the Brits had got the marks they had done.
That's really interesting, because actually, looking back as a spectator at the time, I don't recall that. I remember the incredible sort of outpouring of emotion of the British team and the dancing horses, and how everybody all of a sudden was talking about equestrian sports. I think, as we've said, one of the first medals of the games. Laura Bechtolsheimer as well, taking the individual bronze. And as you say, that sort of got lost a little bit in actually Charlotte's achievements, and it shouldn't, because it was exceptional. I think Lion King music, Charlotte had the wonderful British music, and I'm sure that Laura had brilliant Lion King music,
which just long-established freestyle.
Just felt like it really fitted the horse. Right, the jumping. Because
Who would have thought it, Kate? Come on, I mean,
I can remember
in my life.
I remember your face now as you came back in the press office, and your beam stretched from ear to ear, and we just couldn't believe it. It was a completely wonderful moment. And I remember, Nick Skelton was completely overwhelmed. All those sort of years he'd been riding at Olympics, and he'd come back from a broken neck, and this had happened, and he was so excited. I remember him sort of surging forward, trying to get on the podium before he was due to get on the podium, and having to be sort of dragged back by Ben Mayer, going, no, we're not quite yet. And
it wasn't expected. It really, really wasn't expected. And and again, that was a bit of a changing of the guard, because it was the first time a lot of people had seen a really quite young Ben and Scott, Ben Mayer and Scott Rash.
Yeah.
It was sort of two oldies and two youngies in a way. And the jump off, I can physically now, I've still got it on my phone actually, I can physically remember how I felt about it. It was so terrifying and thrilling at the same time, and sort of because the Brits didn't start off in the lead, and sort of gradually as the competition built, it was like, I can remember saying to Jenny MacArthur, God, we might win a medal. And then suddenly it turned that we were somehow jumping off for gold. And Peter Charles had not jumped a clear round all week. And he thought, oh my God, how is this going to happen? And he went last of the four in the jump off, and he jumped a clear round. And it was just unbelievable.
If you want to go and watch that round back, listeners, I would thoroughly recommend it. Even if you're here for the eventing talk, go and watch it, because it is absolutely incredible. I've got goosebumps just talking about this now. Right, celebrations in the Golden Saddle. The jumpers had gone wild. What can you tell us? What dirt can you dish? It's been a few years now. It's 12 years ago.
I got whizzed straight up to the main BBC studios, fairly unlikely, because Horse and Hound did a lot of interviews. All of us did a lot of interviews with other media, radio, TV. The connection was made, Greenwich, horses, Britain, Horse and Hound. And I ended up going on BBC News 24 straight from the competition. I'm not even sure I had washed my hair that morning. And a very sweet makeup lady just looked at me and went, do you want a bit of help? Yes, please. So I went, chatted gleefully about British show jumping and gold medals, and then came back to the pub where all four Brit riders were, and riders from other nations, and yeah, just a huge party happening, really.
Yes, because the show jumpers can make the eventers look quite tame, actually, in celebrations. And I think some members of the team were not that well when they had to go to the BBC studios in a taxi the next day. It was just the sort of.
And I remember Ben having Scott had his medal, certainly had his medal around his neck. I think they probably all did. Yeah, and again, Rio, any other Olympics, that just wouldn't have happened. You wouldn't have had that community coming together to celebrate, great British achievement.
If you had to pick a moment, what's the highlight?
The show jumpers winning gold, definitely.
Same for me.
It was so extraordinary. It was unexpected. It was brilliant performances. It was the most beautiful. You've seen the fences, beautiful track, and it was sunny by then. The weather was very in and out. I got drenched to the skin during Andrew Nicholson's unfortunate dressage test. The weather wasn't always great, but it sort of got better, and it was good by then. And it was just, it was horse sport at its very, very best.
And it was a terrific atmosphere as well. And there was a great national feeling that we had pulled off this Olympics, because before the run-up was not great. Not only was the weather pretty awful, but various things had gone wrong on a wider scale. There was the issues with the security. There was, I think we'd hung the Korean flag upside down. I think generally it looked as though, it was going to be a bit of a Muppet Games. And suddenly we pulled off this terrific national event, of which we could be really proud. And I remember a letter being written to one of the papers, and somebody had said, it's great living in London. Everyone's happy. Everyone's in a good mood. There's a lot of polite people around. And please, can we have the Olympics all of the time?
Oh, that's wonderful.
That's definitely not London on a day-to-day basis, listeners. If you're not from around here, that is not London usually.
I think any of us who were there were very proud, pleased, and thrilled to be there in whatever capacity we were. And I knew we all knew tons of people who had volunteered, who were working there in various shapes and forms. And, massive hats off to Alec Lahore and the other discipline managers for pulling off, against a pretty critical background, a spectacular games on the horse front, on the equestrian front.
Can we sum it up? Kate, I've asked you this for the other two games that we've done, listeners. If you haven't listened to the Sydney special or the Athens special, go and have a listen to them, because they're well worth a deep dive into those Olympics as well. But sum it up in 3 words, because actually this has really told a story of the games.
Proud, noisy, thrilling.
Catherine?
Overexcited. No,
exhausted journalist.
It's wrong. I'm trying to, because I was sort of living on my nerves of slight exhaustion, elation. Okay, elation.
That's a good word.
Yeah, it has to say pride again, because we all felt we were part of it. And shock, because the show jumpers weren't supposed to win. And what a way to finish, because we could easily have slightly, the dressage was in the middle and we could have had those highs, and then it could have all slightly slid. And actually, the individual jumping was afterwards, but we were over it by then. We didn't really care.
Didn't matter. Catherine, Kate, thank you both so much. It has been a pleasure to look back on London with you both. I'm going to sum it up: great British success. I think it is how we'll take it away. And I think something that actually none of us will probably ever live through anything like that ever again. So very, very, very special, and a real treat to be able to look at it in more detail. Thank you both.
Thank you. Fun to think about it again.
Looking back, Dee, and hearing Kate and Catherine and having worked with them both at other big events, I'm so envious of their London experience, because that is just something absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah. Once in a lifetime, almost certainly once in a lifetime stuff.
I think the bit that stands out for me as well, listening to them both, it wasn't just the eventing, it was the dressage, it was the jumping, it was the whole equestrian experience as part of the heart of an Olympic Games. And that is something that in the equestrian world, not just eventing, we so often don't get. They're out on a limb. They're, in Hong Kong rather than Beijing. They're not part of the Olympic Village experience. And I think that's the bit that stands out for me, talking to Catherine and Kate particularly. Right, let's go on now to the second part of the second show, because there is absolutely no way we've done it on the other shows. What is it like to ride at an Olympic Games? What is it like to ride at a home Olympic Games? Andrew Hoy gave us an insight into his Sydney experience. Nicola Wilson, Tina Cook, part of the British team who won a team silver in London. And I think this really adds to the conversation that we had in part 1 about legacy, Dee, because they very much, were open and honest about their opinions and how it might look. And I think how it then ended up feeling at the end of this show is, again, something else entirely.
We always, myself and yourself, we've worked together now for a long time. And do you remember when we'd come out of Event Rider Masters commentaries and that kind of thing, and like cross country day in particular, but all the days? But that was probably where we got to know each other best when, in terms of working together. Like, we'd had the pod, but sitting together in live pressure with Robin like roaring into my ear about what we had to say and how many seconds we had and all the rest. That was when they went well, we knew that it was a good day or a good show. Like, but you knew straight away, like you wouldn't even ever have to say, you'd be like, that didn't work. And there was ones that didn't work and there was ones that were good. And the same with the pod, the exact same with the podcast. Like, some of them, for people who've been listening to us for a long time, as soon as we record, you kind of just know the vibe. You're like, that was really good fun to record, and it wasn't. And when you got off this one, you said, oh, we've got a brilliant finish to the London episodes. You knew, like, I
was grinning so much, my face was hurting during this recording.
Like, it's not a funny one. Do you know what I mean? It's actually just because of the way this final interview pulls together all of the, again, I keep saying it, but like when we sat down with Jane and we tried to say, Jane, the Olympics are hard to cover for Red Mills. You know, everyone has to be so careful with like how we present the brand during the Olympics. Also, lots of people are doing the same stuff, you know, in terms of like, okay, the reels are beautiful, good quality reels are beautiful. Even Echo Ratings does some good quality reels these days. But if we go back to the heart of what the podcast was about, it was about trying to capture and tell stories. And when we sat down at Redmond's, we said we'd love the opportunity to tell Olympic stories. This last one, Nicole, I personally think it's one of the best interviews that we've done in the last few years. And I know everyone has their own opinions on that, but I absolutely loved it. When I started, I was like, oh, what's the dynamic? Tina, we get used to hearing Tina through maybe badminton or Burley. You know, I worked with her a little bit with Nick and herself at Burley last year, but like, it's so much more, as professional is the wrong word, but you know, it's so much more tight in terms of like what you can say she's very straight in those. Whereas here, like with you, I think it's totally relaxed. It's calm. It's fun. It's honest. Yeah, I think we'll let it roll. But God, I really loved it, Nickers. Really loved it.
Okay, listeners, we have talked a good bit about what it was like in the build up to London, what it was like to organise the games, what it was like to report on the games. But now we want to get down to business. What was it like to actually ride at a home Olympic Games? It is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And my two guests now are two of the loveliest, most eloquent, brilliant riders that there are. Tina Cook, Nicola Wilson, it's lovely to see you both. Thank you for coming on to share your London memories.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you for asking us.
Okay, first of all, take us back when it was first announced that London was going to host an Olympic Games. Tina, can you remember that moment? You would have been very much kind of at the height of your career. It would have been, I would imagine, pre-Hong Kong. So you were already going to go to an Olympic Games at that stage. But can you remember actually when London was going to become a reality?
Yeah, you know what? I think we might have been at a team training or something somewhere, because I remember being with William Fox-Pitt and he just went mad. I went, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. I did think brilliant, but my initial reaction was, God, will I still be doing it then? You know, you sort of imagine that you get to 30 or 35 or whatever, and you think, I don't know if I'm going to be competing. So I was very excited, but I remember William being more excited, bizarrely. I don't know why that sticks in my head.
Nick, how about you?
I'm not sure I really do have any memories of the announcement, to be honest, other than I hadn't been to a Games. I was desperate to go to an Olympic Games. And I think I probably thought, it would be typical if I went to a home Games rather than travelling around the world and going to all the magical ones. But having been to London, I feel incredibly honoured to have been to a home Games, and it was so special.
I certainly seem to remember looking back when I would have been probably my eventing obsession wasn't quite as strong then as it is now, but I remember, I guess, not quite understanding the enormity of it and the gravity of it as I would now. If somebody told me in 2024, you know, London has got the Olympic Games in 8 years' time, I would be absolutely beside myself, probably very like William and kind of thinking, how amazing is this? Whereas at the time, I don't think I realised just how enormous it was going to be, not only for eventing, but for actually sport in this country as a whole. I think it probably took me a little bit by surprise, certainly.
I think the whole country was taken over by a wave of excitement, wasn't it? As the torch went around the country, you know, it sort of built in, built in gravity, didn't it? And it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And the excitement and expectations attached with that also grew all the way up to the opening ceremony, I think.
When you talk about the Olympics, it gets exciting. Then your obsession gets more intense in that, trying to get there, trying to be part of the squad, because, you know, even though as much as you could dream about it being in London, the reality of it being you or yourself being part of that team, the strain of getting there almost overrides the excitement of it, because you just get so obsessed about going, which doesn't want to take away the excitement of it. It is truly amazing, but it's not all fluffy and celebrations in the build up for it, because you just know with horses that things can go wrong. So you are excited, but then there's a part of you that says stay grounded.
You know, you still couldn't breathe, because a sigh of relief, because then we had a pre-trot up before the actual trot up, didn't we?
Yeah.
With the team horses, and the reserves were literally driving around the roundabout waiting to come in and take our place if any of the horses, you know, didn't look absolutely spot on. And that for me was one of the most terrifying moments, because you just knew that it could still be all over.
I think it was Lucy Vigersmar, Lucy McCarthy as she is now, isn't it? With the Shabrack, who was one of the reserves and sort of would have been going around the London one-way system or whatever it would be. Let's talk about Greenwich for a second, because very different, the Badmintons, the Burleys. There was a lot of talk about legacy. There was a lot of talk about holding it sort of in London at a venue that, one, had never held a horse trials before, but two, wasn't going to ever hold a horse trials again. What was your immediate reaction to it, Nicola, and kind of how did that venue make you feel kind of building up to those games?
I think it was very exciting because it was in the middle of London, and because it hadn't been a horse trials before, you had absolutely no idea how it was going to be, what the cross-country questions were going to be, and how the terrain would stand up to it. So I think it had, it was very exciting, and sort of didn't quite know what to expect.
I was slightly on the build-up. Yes, totally agree with Nicola. But I was slightly disappointed there wasn't going to be a legacy. Yes. And I was really split in my views. Yes, in London, you had no preconceived ideas of how the course was going to ride. There was no advantage, home advantage, because we'd obviously never ridden round there. But I find it very sad that there wasn't a stadium left behind, or a legacy, or a Hickstead type venue, or somewhere near London that children could go to and ride and say, I've ridden in the Olympic Park. And I make the comparison to Hickstead because I'm local to Hickstead, and that main arena is just so special. And then you ride in there and it just gives you goosebumps. And that's just not just Hickstead, but it's Hickstead, not an Olympic venue. So you knew that not everybody it's only going to be us that's ever going to have had that amazing experience of riding around London. So I was always slightly sad that there wasn't going to be a legacy left behind from the Olympic Games. Got children then. I had two children then, and Isabel was always keen on her riding, and I thought wouldn't it be amazing if she could have a little trot around in the main arena, Olympic Stadium. But in the next breath, then actually when we were there and being part of it, I could see why it was so amazing being in London. And as we all probably go on to say, just going away from Greenwich, you just then were suddenly on the streets of London. It was so weird. You feel like you've been drinking. It was that you 1 minute in London, next minute you're Olympic Games. Like, what's going on?
And some of the cross-country fences, if not all of them, they have all gone out to different events, haven't they? So they're being jumped by the next generation, which is a little bit of something to come from it, isn't it?
I actually just saw a post on Instagram today with a little bit of London at Aston Walls as part of the kind of pre-Olympic build-up. I think they had a class specifically for those horses aiming for Paris, and there were a couple of flags. There might have been a fence or something. And we're 12 years on. Those fences must be kind of reaching the end of their timeline now. They must have been well looked after, I'm sure. But it's a different legacy, isn't it? You kind of talk about the legacy, and we've seen it with Sydney, and we did the show on Sydney, listeners, that you can go back and listen to, and talked about the legacy that is there. Whereas this isn't necessarily a tangible legacy. It's very much kind of the impact that equestrian sports had on those games, and the experience that it offered to the athletes, but also being part of that kind of inner Olympic circle. Let's talk build up to the games, because this home Olympics, excitement's building. It's right on the cusp of all becoming a reality. So selection, it feels like a very topical point to be talking about. Tina, take us back to the moment you found out you had been picked for London.
Well, I'm just going to have to rewind like a year, because I had almost the worst preparation you could possibly imagine in the few years on the build up, because we had obviously had Hong Kong, Beijing. Minus Frolic had won, individual silver. He'd come out the next year, was European champion, cruising along. What could go wrong? And then he, the following year, the year before, he got a random lump on his wither, whether it was a saddle, a fight or something. He got a lump on his wither. He then had to have he couldn't do badminton. He had intensive antibiotics. They couldn't get rid of it. He then got colitis and basically nearly died. So the pre-Olympic year, where you want to be out there shining in front of the selectors going, yes, look at me, I'm ready for London. The horse was dying. Was in hospital. It was really written about, but he honestly was going to die. The vets eventually said to me one evening, if the phone rings this evening, I'm afraid we're going to have to let him go. We cannot keep him alive any longer. So as you can imagine, I sat up all night. Luckily, the phone never rang. He survived. He then came back in, he was so thin by then. So he survived all that. A few other little things in the way. But anyway, so that was a dreadful build-up. So then he wasn't qualified for the Olympics, which again is so ridiculous when basically he won medals at the previous one. Most people can't really get their head around that. So obviously we won't qualify. So then we had to qualify by, I don't know, whatever you have to qualify by June or something on 2012. In the meantime, my father died and I got divorced. So it was super winter. And the only thing that went right for me in 2012 was the Olympics. And we went out to Ballindennis to get qualified. And Ballindennis very kindly put on a competition earlier than when they would normally do. I think it was in March, might have been end of February, actually can't remember. And so there were a few other nations, I think the Irish being one of them, which is why they put it on to get qualified. So we trekked on out there. It was freezing cold. They did an amazing job out there. To be honest, we were just numb, just to everything that was going on with our family. And we got our qualification out there. So I just remember finishing the cross country and just bursting into tears. It was just such an emotional roller coaster that at least I was qualified. I still didn't think in a million years I was going, but it was a step in the right direction. And then, it goes on from there. The horse did survive, but, from the year before, and I did go on and be selected. But I think I aged 10 years plus in 1 year in the build-up and everything else that went on.
Do you think it actually, if you go into an Olympic Games in a year whereby, everything's going to plan and that's all you've got to worry about, actually that can become even more all-consuming? Do you think actually in hindsight it's very easy 12 years later, 13 years later to think, actually it took the pressure off the Olympic selection almost because there was so much else going on at that point?
I love your thought process there. I would like it to have been
every cloud silver lining, Tina.
Not really agreeing with you on that one.
We'll take it as a no.
I would quite like it to have been easier. There are certain things I don't remember because I've bounced on my head too many times. But I do remember sitting in the vets, as well as him surviving colitis, he then got a twisted gut. And they were deciding whether to operate on him. And that was the following year of 2012, before even going to Ballindennis to get qualified. And I thought, there is not a dicky bird chance of me going to any form of Olympic Games. That is if this Henry, was his pet name, minus Frolic, survived. So to be honest, I remember sitting my hands on my and going, that's it. No more Olympics for me. All I want the horse to do is him to survive. So to actually get there, he probably wasn't on full power, but I think the whole team, everybody, the vets just did an amazing job to get that horse even there. And I couldn't, I had to prepare him, but prepare him with as minimal pressure as possible. So to come and jump a clear round for the team when he really still have been a little bit on the weaker side, he was quite anemic when he finished, to do what he did do, that we all did. I was just so proud of the horse.
So given then the roller coaster to get to selection, actually the kind of coming full circle of not only has he survived, not only have you got through the most awful time, but actually the Olympics, which you thought was a dream that had gone, was actually potentially about to come true. What was that feeling like?
Oh yeah, amazing, totally. Because the previous Olympics, I was reserve for Hong Kong, because Minus Frolic was only a 10-year-old then, and he was such a young horse. So that was all a bit of a whirlwind because I got in, a few weeks before. So, and then we had this time, we had the whirlwind of getting in because of him being so ill. I suppose it just made the whole thing so much more special. Yes, I hadn't had the preparation that you would ideally like for an Olympic Games, but the selectors obviously felt that the horse was back in good enough form. He went really well at Bramham, I think. I can't actually remember, but we had a good prep run as well as getting our qualification, and it was lovely that everyone had faith in us that we could pull it out the bag again. And yes, we did, but it suddenly from as you said, my brain of not going to actually this is happening was
It was Bramham, because if you remember everything, it was such a wet year that year, 2012. I think Badminton was cancelled. I think Chatsworth was cancelled. Is that correct? So I think there was so few competitions that we could actually go to, and then Bramham became sort of the final trial. It was done in reversal. It was done with the show jumping last, I think, and it was very much treated as a major. We did the short format, but we show jump last.
Oh yeah, good. I'm glad I'm not going mad. I sort of thought that. Yes, I know there was a lot of pressure for everybody that we all had to go well to get picked. Because we were fighting for our places like you do, tooth and nail, and we are all friends. But at the end of it, we all want to go, so you've got to do your best.
Nicola's roller coaster was kind of similar to yours in the build up to Hong Kong, Tina, because Nicola, you were originally selected as a reserve, so you were rider number 6 essentially. Take us back to that moment, because it was off the back of what had been a couple of very successful seasons for you and Dodie Opposition Buzz, as he is more commonly known.
Yes, it's a sort of the last 3 years before that, he'd done 2 Europeans and a World Games and been a counting score for the British team, which was amazing. And I sort of always hoped that I would one day be on that team, but I never expected it. And because we'd had a good he'd always gone so consistently with his jumping, and he'd been counting score, I slightly felt a bit more confident that I would be selected for the Olympics. But when the phone call came from Yogi to say that I was first reserve, I felt as if my world had ended. It had been turned upside down. I just felt as if someone had just walloped me over the head. And I just thought, oh my goodness, I never even saw this coming. What an idiot am I to even think that I'd be going. So I said, thank you very much. And we did the call, and I was never really prepared for what happened next. As soon as the team was then announced, I got loads of phone calls from papers, from news channels wanting to come and interview me, and I just suddenly was struck by the enormity of it and what a responsibility I had to the sport. Yes, I was in my own way grieving what I wasn't going to have, but also an overwhelming responsibility for the wider picture of the sport. So after the phone call and first phone call and feeling as if I got my way through it okay, I then wrote a couple of sentences down on a piece of card and just reeled that off time and time and time again. And I said how, you know, gutted I was, but how delighted I was for the other riders, and I fully respected the decision of the selectors. Yes, it was, for me, 10 days of torture, really. Alistair and I, the build up for the Olympics, as we said, was phenomenal because it was a home Olympics. Everything on the telly was to do with the Olympics. And, it was just so gutting and galling, and it hurt so much that we weren't going. So then Alistair banned us from watching the television, full stop. And we were just the radio. Anyway, that got too difficult as well. So we just went around in silence. I couldn't ride Dodie for a couple of days because I didn't want him to think that I was upset with him. It had nothing to do with him. He'd always been fabulous. And then 10 days later, Yogi rang back to say that congratulations, I am now going to the Olympic Games. And I said, who had dropped off, who wasn't going, and it was, as Tina said, we're all really good friends. We all work really, really hard, and we all want to beat each other. But equally, we all know how hard everybody works and sacrifices made. And when it was Piggy, a dear friend of both of ours, I was absolutely gutted. And you would expect a phone call like that, you would have thought, like previous team selections, I was wanting to do cartwheels everywhere and going, woohoo, this is amazing. But for this one, I was absolutely, truly gutted and devastated, because the 10 days of hurt that I had, I knew poor Piggy was going to have a lot longer of hurt. And whilst I was appreciative of my position, it wasn't until having a chat with Piggy, and she said, "Come on, Nick Knott," which is what she always calls me. "You've just got to get on with this. This is your chance. Go and enjoy it, and do it for us all." And it makes you feel emotional now talking about it. But it was certainly a childhood dream come true for me to go to the Olympic Games and be part of that amazing squad and have the blessing of Piggy.
I feel like just listening to the last, 5-10 minutes of this show kind of sums up to a degree the kind of the extreme emotional roller coaster that you have to go on to kind of get to the Olympic stage. Whatever discipline you're in, whatever sport you take part in, there are so many ups and downs. Then you throw a few horses into the mix and kind of amplifies that even more. So the Olympic Games, the home Olympic Games, is on the horizon. You're all heading to London. Take us to Greenwich and your first impressions, having already kind of had a bit of an idea as to what you might expect. There'd obviously been the test event the year before. What was it like, Tina? What do you remember about going to the Olympic Village and the park for the first time?
When you went to the park, it was the undulations of when we walked the course for the first time. I thought, I am so pleased I'm not riding a really strong horse. The ground was, it was beautifully designed. The ground was quite firm with very short grass, like a lawn, but you thought, gosh, this is going to be really slippery. There were really unusual fences. You just knew that you were going to have to go beyond your comfort zone and fast. Nicola's a fast rider anyway, but I knew I was going to have to really let the handbrake off. You knew that it was going to feel quite intense because the areas where the general public going to be was only small areas, so it was going to be very intense. The Olympic Village was different because we got the bus. We had mini buses that took us from the Olympic Village to the venue, to Greenwich, and that was about half an hour, Nix, wasn't it? Yeah, about that. And then we had the lanes that were all cleared for us, so we were like royalty going back, even though we had royalty with us, obviously, Mrs. Tyndall. But we were all treated, the same way, all athletes, and you get on the right bus and it just takes you straight there. And it was brilliant that we were able to stay in the Olympic Village, because that makes an Olympic Games so special. You are surrounded by, you see people, short people, fat people, thin people, young people. We're the oldest by a long way. And you just wonder what they do. And just being, but you know that they're all the best at that time that the country has. and the various nations have, you just feel like a child again. And it was lovely actually talking about children, because my children were at school and they really didn't pay that much attention about what I did. I mean, Isabel did a bit, but I mean, they were about, I really sort of thought about, I don't know, maybe they were about 5 and 7-ish, maybe. But they were at primary school, and suddenly, because primary school were talking about it and wanted me to come in and do a little talk to them, they suddenly realised that actually this was something quite cool that mummy might be doing. So then I had to make the decision on whether to bring them to Greenwich, to London or not. I've got to stay focused. I'm an athlete. With my mum, really, mum wanted to be there. She said, well, I'm not going to be your permanent nanny, having the children running around. I'm like, oh, God, what am I going to do? So I did get a lady that helped me with the children. She brought them up by train. So they thought that was quite cool. And she was responsible for them, watched me do my dressage, which obviously was in the pouring rain. So that put my son off horses. Anyway, because he was standing there watching me in the pouring rain.
The lid of the judge's box, as you were on your extended walk in the wind and the rain, it blew up like as if it had been opened by a tin opener. And I can say about, how focused and well trained and in front of the leg and connected down the rain that he was, that he may well have noticed it. Of course he would have noticed it, but he stayed totally with you all the way through there, and that was magical.
Oh yeah, it was completely, because he was quite a sort of spooky horse anyway, and I mean, and sort of quite insecure. So how he didn't overreact from that, I to this day don't know why. But that's when luck is with you, isn't it? We did the best that he could do. So the whole Olympic Games was amazing from that point of view. I only had the children there for a day. I didn't have them there on cross country day. I just felt if something happened, I don't want to be in my head worrying where they were. I knew they could watch it on telly, so they've experienced it. And, they're at that age when really they don't really understand. It was a shame that they weren't a little bit older. So yeah, they were there for a day of dressage day, but certainly weren't there cross country day, because I needed to be 1,000,000% focused on obviously what I was doing. I can't even remember what the question was now. I've gone waffling on.
To be fair, it was about the Olympic Village and everything else. And I actually
I went off a complete tangent then.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's all great, because I mean, I just find it brilliant that actually, of course, when we're eventing at Olympic Games in London, there's like a massive rainstorm and a judge's brief tries to blow away. It just feels very English. It feels very normal for something like that to happen with us. Going back to the Athletes Village, because I think this is a really kind of interesting point of it being part of the whole Olympic experience as such, because it would have been something different to what you'd had in Hong Kong a few years previously, Tino, because obviously the eventing there was separate. So Nicola, being surrounded by all those other athletes, how much interaction did you have? Did you get to talk to them? And if so, who did you meet? What can you tell us? Give us a little bit of inside info on those first.
Well, it was amazing because you weren't just an eventing team or the equestrian team. You were one team, Team GB. So we were in Team GB house. All the British athletes were in one house. So you couldn't help. I think when we arrived, I went up in a lift with Beth Tweddle, the gymnast, and we were chat all the way. And you felt as if you had something massively in common with everybody there. So you had something to talk about. What sports were you doing and what was your journey here? And, as in a performance journey to the Olympic Games. And it was really exciting, that feeling of togetherness. And when we got to Team GB house, we went down to the basement where we were given, it can't have been accreditation, I don't know what it is. We went downstairs, but there we met Andy and Jamie Murray, and I think I had a photo with them. And, there's other people that had arrived at the Athletes Village at the same time that were sort of going through the do's and the don'ts and welcomes and getting a little bit of a welcome pack and things like that. So it was really exciting. And going back to the dining hall where Tina said about the different sizes of people and what they were eating. I remember Mary King and wanting a photo next to one of the basketball players. Well, he was enormous. And there was Mary having a photo, bending her knees. And I remember as well saying to her, you don't need to bend your knees. He's twice your but it was fascinating to see how varied their diets were and their statures and what sports they were doing. So it was a really inclusive place to be.
What about the opening ceremony? Because I feel like the opening ceremony from London has kind of gone down in history. Did you go? What do you remember of that? Because it would have been very close to the start of the eventing, I think, wouldn't it?
It always is straight after we're the first, competition on the next day. So it's unfair on who is drawn early. So it was much discussion amongst everybody. Would they allow the two later riders that were drawn later, because there was more of us there, not just the three. So no. And I felt quite strongly that it had to be the same for everybody. It's disadvantage of somebody that's drawn number one. So they've got the disadvantage of drawing number one for the team. And, oh, by the way, you can't go to the opening ceremony either. So to me, I think it needed to be the same for everybody, which was the general consensus. So actually, our rooms were quite high up in the sort of the building, the tower block that we were in. And we just made it a party. We could see into the main stadium. We could see the screen in the main stadium. Yogi went off and sneaked in a couple of bottles of wine or champagne or something. I can't actually remember. So we had a little bit of sneaky alcohol. And so we sort of watched it from our rooms. So you weren't really, of course, it would have been amazing to have been there in person. But there are some sacrifices you have to make. We were there to be athletes, to perform at our very best. So to have an awful lot of standing around, and even though when you're an athlete being in the main stadium, there is a lot of queuing, as you can imagine. All the nations have to get together, all the athletes have to stand there hours before they go in and parade. Then once they've paraded, they hang around for hours, and you don't usually get to bed until probably midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning after the ceremony, whether it's the opening or closing. And then if you're up at 5 o'clock the next morning because you've drawn early, it's not really the right recipe. So we made it fun. And you've got a funny story about Zara, which I don't remember, but Nicola, go on.
Well, it was quite surreal, really, having Zara there. And when 007 goes to Buckingham Palace and he knocks at the door and the butler opens the door with two corgis, one at each side of him. And then Zara sort of says, oh, there's, for argument's sake, Bill and the butler, and that named the two corgis. I can't remember any of their names. And I was just like, whoa, this is a bit surreal. And then he walks in to where the Queen is, and he says whatever he says. And at that, the Queen turns round on her chair, and Zara says, "Oh, it is Granny." And I just thought, if I had false teeth, they definitely would have been out of my mouth across the room. It was just, like pinch worthy. It was like, oh my goodness, is this really happening? And it was just so funny and so special, and so many things.
Oh, I absolutely love that. And am I right in saying that Zara wanted a picture of Usain Bolt?
Yeah, so whilst we were watching the ceremony, as Tina said, all the nations were filing down below, so we could see them through our window. And when it got to Jamaica's time, she desperately wanted to meet him, so she shot down and out and had gone and introduced herself. And yes, I think everybody was trying to swap pins as well. It's a bit of an Olympic thing, I think. So it was who could get the most pins.
Do you get more than one pin in order to swap them? Is there a limit to the number of pins you get? We get
a bag full, a nice little bag full, probably, I don't know, 40, 50 in there, so that you can swap them around. I've kept them. I'm a real keeper of memorabilia, just so that when I get older than what I do now, I can have a look, or when I'm moving house or like I'm doing, and you suddenly find everything. And yeah, look, you want to keep the memory going. Life gets so busy nowadays, and it's only on these occasions that you start thinking about it and talking about it, which in so many ways is such a shame. And when you're sort of growing up and you imagine, gosh, if you ever went to Olympics or if you represented your country, you just would walk on water. Unfortunately, life afterwards does sort of get back to normal. And so I always remember somebody saying to me, the most important thing is to absolutely enjoy and try and remember every single moment. And you know, and Mary was a great example, because she would go up. She was ballsy, probably more ballsy than Nicola and I, and walk up and have a picture taken with it, people. And you're like, oh my God, that's so embarrassing. Well, the second time round when I did the Olympics, I was like, I'm just going to go straight up to them, you know, sod that. Because you just got to make the most of it. Don't be embarrassed, because everybody is in the same position. So I gained a lot more confidence from it, because you won't get those opportunities to meet some of your heroes that you watch in other sports, because you're never going to get anywhere near them ever again, because you know we get so divided off into our own disciplines. So it was absolutely that opportunity. You know, we had the opportunity to meet Anthony Joshua, and I've met Anthony Joshua on several occasions since, and we've had chats. You know, when I mention that to other people, they're like, "Oh my God, that's really cool." Yes, that is really cool, and actually, he's a really nice man. And you know, I was really privileged to meet him. I would never have met him in any other situation other than we were in the lift in the Team GB lift or on the stairs. You know, the buildings they're quite sterile, really. You know, they are a building. You know, if you are used to having your own comfort, if you're a person, that's another thing, that actually as a person, if you're used to your home comforts and that is the only way you can function, you do have to be able to join in with a team when the team all move and you all need to get on the bus, or you're in a room and everybody has to eat at the same time. You have to be able to adjust to that system, because otherwise you're going to make life very difficult for yourself. If you've always had a very sheltered, isn't quite the right word, but if you've always done everything in a particular way, you do have to learn to be adjustable, whether in what you do and mentally, stick to your plan, but you have to be able to adjust. And you know, sleeping in these rooms where you don't have everything that you have at home, not like your lorry that Nicola and I love a hot water blanket, don't we, Nixie? And electric blanket. Sorry, what am I saying? Not as though you'd need an electric blanket in the middle of summer, but you know, there are certain things that you know you don't have because you're limited of what you can have with you. So you know, you make the most of what you can do, and you have to be flexible and adjustable on other things.
That's really interesting. Just listening to that, actually, I was going slightly off topic, listening to a podcast with Laura Kenny fairly recently, so Laura Trott, and it was actually about the build up to London, and the cycling sort of high performance team bought them all mattresses that they all slept on for a period of time before the games, and they all got bought in for them to continue sleeping on during the games, just because it was that sort of tiny attention to detail that might be that sort of 0.01% that made the difference. I think we can underestimate just actually how different it is and how that can affect you. You've got to be able to cope with it. One little thing just to pick up on, because I didn't know this until we started chatting at the beginning of this recording. As an Olympian, you do get something every year. Give us a little insight into, is it a card that comes every year?
I think it's maybe every 10.
I've had one before that. I think I had one last. I think each Olympic year we get one.
Okay, maybe.
Yes, I think each Olympic year, because I've had more than one, because I was surprised when I got one last time, because obviously I wasn't competing. So I think we might get one this year. But anyway, go on, Nixie. Say what you were saying.
So I got the one that's above my my ear here, behind me on the pin board in the office, and that actually came to hospital when I was in hospital 2022 with my most recent injury, and it was just lovely. And it says, "Once an Olympian, always Olympian." And when you are sort of at rock bottom in your life, it's to receive something like that through the post. was really uplifting and exciting. And exactly as you said with your memorabilia box, Tina, before, it's just, it gives you a warm feeling of what you did do, which is really lovely.
Yeah, no, that is really special. And they do actually, inside the card, obviously it's a mass produced card, but they do write "Dear Tina," always Olympian, and that is special. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really lovely touch. And the letters that you get after Olympic Games as well. I remember, from so many people that actually I will, when I have my own proper house, nearly in a proper house. Nicola's in her new house now. I'm not there yet. I will frame them because it is, there's so many things, that people do. And Camilla Parker Bowles, as she was then, I've got a letter written by her saying, "Well done." That I've kept that, and I can't wait to put it in a frame and then put it up on the wall. And especially as I'm now sort of semi-retired, obviously no chance of going to any more championships or anything else. Those special touches of cards or letters or whatever, and photographs mean more now than they ever have done.
That's very, very cool. Right, going back to the competition itself as such. Cross country day. Dressage is done and dusted. The judges' blocks tried to blow away. From memory, I think the weather on cross country day was pretty reasonable. It wasn't bad at all. Nick, am I right in saying that you were first out for the British team? So you would have been quite early?
Yeah. Yes, I was Pathfinder. And where the stables and the main stadium were, they were sort of down at the bottom. And it was quite sort of quiet and tranquil. It was a nice place to be. And then when you rode up to the heat moor at the top, I was just blown away at how many people there were. It was an absolute sea of heads. You couldn't see anything other than heads. And it was a very small walkway from the, up the gallops to the sort of collecting ring, which was again a lot smaller than what we were used to. And it was absolutely packed. It was amazing to see the starters, the starting team that you would get, at national and international competitions here in England. That was so homely and welcoming. It was really nice. But it just felt as if everything was coming in on top of you. And I warmed up and went to the start box, and the starting team said, "Good luck, Nix, good luck, Dodie." And they counted you down, and then off we went. Well, the cheer and the screaming and the clapping when you left the start box, I did just think, wow, God, this is loud. This is amazing. Come on, it's the first fence, concentrate. Don't want any mess ups here. And got way around to fence 4, and just after fence 4, that hedge, there was the minute marker, and I sort of got to the minute marker expecting my stopwatch to beep, and it didn't. And I was like, oh my God, I've made a mistake with my gallop. I'm going too fast. And I looked at my watch, and I was absolutely spot on. It was absolutely fine. But because of the sheer noise that was following you around the course, you couldn't hear your watch. And the gallop tracks were so narrow, weren't they, Tina? Everybody seemed to be there on top of you. And it was twisty and turny, which you'd said, then down slopes. The camber was often it was against you. It was not like a normal sort of cross-country course that we'd ridden round before. So it just took so much more concentrating every single stride, and where they were putting their feet, and it was just phenomenal. It felt as if you're going around a go-kart track with all this noise. So every minute, it's such a problem, isn't it, having to look at my watch every minute, but it's an extra thing that you don't normally do. Just to make sure that you absolutely got it right, and you got home, and I, as the Pathfinder, got home and was clear inside the time, and the absolute relief when I jumped the last fence and went through the finish, and I knew I'd done my job on the most amazing horse who had been so brilliant cross country. But because he was so brilliant, comes more expectation that he's just going to be fine. And then that piles on the pressure to you as a rider as well. And it just adds a different element to it as well. But I was just so relieved to get there. And I was met at the finish, wasn't I, Tina, by you, Zara, Yogi and William. I think Mary must have been out next, and I've got a lovely photo of us all having a hug, and Lynn, my fabulous head girl, she was with Dodie walking him around and cooling him off, and it was just a magical moment, and I just felt so much relief that I'd done my job for the day. That was behind me, and I just, it was sheer pleasure and relief and gratefulness to the beautiful horse.
I mean, I don't think people realise how much pressure it is on the number one to go, and actually how much respect like Nicola, for the teammates behind her, that we have so much faith in her that she would go and nail it and prove that it's all possible. You know, to send out a number one that goes and gets it wrong or has a fall or whatever else, the difference in the mindset for the rest of the team is unbelievable. That when you have somebody like Nicola that goes and does that, and you have total faith, Nicola has the amazing competition brain, she's such a fast rider and everything else, that you have so much, it just breathes so much confidence in the rest of the team and the rest of us that, you know, where to come. So thank you, Nicola.
Oh, sweet words. It's going to have to be a big present later, isn't it?
What was it like, Tina, then, having seen Nicola go out, having kind of got a feeling for what that experience was going to be like, to then kind of get on board and say, right, now I've got to go and do my job?
Yeah, well, you do think, oh my God, she's made it all look so flippin' easy. I don't want to be the one that goes and mucks up. To be honest, you then just had to be very careful as a rider to stay focused about how the course was right. It rode sort of as we expected it to be. When we'd walked it, there weren't really any tricky distances as such. It was more the terrain that you didn't want to get down on the clock, because you would struggle to make up on the clock. But I remember down by the stables, we didn't really have anywhere to go and get away from the public and the stress. You know, you need a bit of downtime, because, as Nicola said, it's so intense. So we would sort of go and sit in the tack room. So you didn't really want to get in the girls or the grooms that are helping us get in their way, but we needed somewhere just to sort of sit. And Zara went and had a sleep. I was sitting in there with her, and I saw her set her alarm. Oh God, now what's she doing? So she set her alarm for about 15-20 minutes, and she just lay up on a hard surface on one of the trunks with all our stuff in and had a sleep, which is an amazing skill to be able to do. Then I remember thinking, oh God, I better just hang around in case her alarm goes off, because she goes cross country before me. So I let her sleep, and then became all motherly, and so I thought, no, I'll keep an eye on my clock just to check. So anyway, her alarm goes off. It goes off quite a few times with Zara. As it did in the flat. An alarm. She sets about 4 of them as they go me, me, me. She doesn't turn it off on the first bleep. It goes about 10 times. Oh my God. So you know Zara's getting up early. Anyway, so when she goes cross country, I'm staying down, and because I was the next one out after Zara to get focused and get ready. Anyway, when I went up to the start, there'd been a sort of few holds for varying reasons. And when I was up there was a hold on. So I was walking around the collecting ring. And as Nicola said, the crowd were just amazing, calling out your name. And you're like, oh, stay focused. This is just so unbelievably cool. But I didn't know how long I was waiting, so I was up there a lot longer. So we were walking around trying to keep the horses focused so that the horses didn't sort of panic. And Zara had finished, and she came up to me and she calls me Gran. That's my pet name. I don't know, because when I was at Gatcombe, I'm rewinding slightly, I was 20, Zara was 10. And I got a young rider scholarship to be based at Gatcombe as one of the leading young riders of that time was a scholarship to train with Mark Phillips at Gatcombe. And that was me when I was 20. And so when we look back on it, and then there was Zara and I, 10 years apart, when you're 10 and 20 seems huge. And then as you get older, the age group shortens, and we've always stayed very close. And she's always called me Gran, because I suppose I'm the old bird. And so she shrieked across, as she does subtly, across the warm-up, "Come on, Gran, get on with it, or some sort of abuse like that I possibly can't repeat. And she said, I did it, and mine pulled both front shoes off, which he did.
As did mine one shoe.
What was he? He lost both front shoes, didn't he? He had really flat feet. Zara's little bay horse. Can't think what it's called.
High Kingdom.
High Kingdom. Trevor, that's it. So she was absolutely at her very best. I mean, it was slippery anyway. As Nicola said, with the terrain. So to lose 2 front shoes, Zara could hardly have taken a pull. She was amazing to be inside the time with a horse that lost both front shoes. Anyway, she was giving me a fair amount of abuse to wind me up in the pre-warm-up when we were walking round and round and round. I think I was up there for it felt like about half an hour, goodness knows what it was. And Zara basically telling me to flip him or get on with it. And that just sticks in with my head. The rest of the course actually becomes a bit of a blur because of the noise and the expectation. You just have to stay focused, go, right, you take each fence at a time. Yeah, where are my minute markers? Stay focused, not I'm at Olympic Games and there's God knows how many million people watching me. Actually, just this is what I'm doing. This is my job. This is what I'm doing. Enjoy it when you get back. And I did. I went clear inside the time. I mean, Minus Frolic obviously was like driving a Ferrari, and you could just go up and down those hills, and he just accelerates. So yeah, it was a incredibly special day.
At what point, Tina, did you get the chance to kind of look back on the previous 12 months and go, we've just overcome all of that and gone clear inside the time at an Olympic Games on home soil?
I think you only really enjoy it when you got the medals around your neck. And even then, I know we all did. We were so flipping close to gold.
Yeah.
We were thrilled with silver. Don't take me wrong. William unfortunately got a lot of time faults cross country. His horse suddenly got very tired. So that was, it was an added into our score. So then we were in silver. But the way that the show jumping worked out, we ended up being, didn't we, Nicole? I think we were only a fence off gold in the end.
Fence and a little bit in the end, I think.
A fence and a little bit. It was all very, very close. So then it was almost like, and Zara had a really unusual fence down. So, in the competitiveness in us, was like gold was so close, but obviously silver was unbelievably special. And from a personal point of view, which I'm sure it's the same with everybody, you finish one phase. Yes, you're thrilled. You've gone so well across country, but then, boringly, horse got to be sound, trot up, whatever else. Then you've got to go into that massive stadium. You've got 2 show jumping, right? The team show jumping, got to go the right way, which sounds so blooming obvious when we're talking about it now. Got to hear the bell. There's such a multitude of things. What am I going to do with my warm-up? Am I going to jump about 5 or 6 fences? Do I need to jump 10 fences? Must be strict with myself. You cannot allow yourself, sadly, in our sport, in our discipline, to relax. And yes, you enjoy it momentarily, but then there's a next bit to do. So to be honest, correct me, Nixie, if you think differently, it's not really until you're getting your medals that you can actually go, okay, I am now going to look around me and go, this is amazing, and wave to the crowds and cheer at everybody, and everyone's calling your name, and it's just amazing. And afterwards, when all the Team GB have all their celebrations, but during the competition, you just can't. I
do remember when we'd all show jumped and we knew we were silver, we were all stood. We were off our horses, weren't we? And we were all stood looking over the barrier into the stadium, and none of us said anything. All 5 of us riders were sort of all really quiet, taking in the fact that it was silver, and we didn't know how to feel. It wasn't what we were perhaps wanting. And then you think, oh my God, stop being so ridiculous. It's a silver medal. This is fantastic. And it wasn't then until we were on the podium, exactly as you say, that you think, oh, this is amazing. This is fantastic.
I was going to ask about that actually, because obviously massive public support and it sounds like the crowds were absolutely incredible and everything else. And this is something that's really probably quite relevant to today's British team, which gets kind of the weight of a nation on their shoulders. There was a huge expectation to go and deliver. to get the gold medal? Did it feel that way?
I think we are all pros. You know, we've all won medals. We've been on British teams. I don't think it's any more than when you go there to do your personal best. Yes, you are part of a team, but the team wouldn't talk about the gold medal. You talk about your performance, and if everybody does their personal best, then that would have been a gold medal. Look, out of 5 people, obviously at some point there's going to be 1 or 2 out of the 5 that things haven't quite gone their way. And if it had, would we have won the gold? Yeah, maybe, but other nations might say the same. So I feel that the pressure now, having only 3 riders, I mean, I can't even comprehend how they must be. At least we had a drop score, you know. Only having the 3 and no drop score, I think in eventing is just crazy. That's another whole topic of conversation.
That's a whole podcast.
You know, we felt the pressure ourselves, but it's a whole new, you know, another level of pressure, I think. Do you not think, Nicola?
Because
Definitely.
It was a team of 5, wasn't it? And 3 counting scores. That was the format for London. And I mean, that feels a world away from where we're at now, and sort of a luxury, if you like. And yet at the time, it is what you know, and you kind of you can only do what you can do with it. While we're kind of looking back on the games, we've talked a bit about the opening ceremony and mixing with the athletes in the village and everything else. At the end of your competition, did you get to watch any more of the Olympics? Did you get to experience any more of London?
Yes, I did. I actually got, because of being an Olympian before, I got the opportunity of selecting 2 sports that a year before, that I would like to go to. So I got 2 tickets to athletics, even though you couldn't choose what day. Well, I don't know. Anyway, I think you were allocated 2 tickets. And then I actually got 2 tickets for equestrianism, because at that point, Miners Frolic was nearly dying. And so I wasn't going. So I was then able to give those 2 tickets to somebody else. But I took my mum and we went to athletics. It wasn't super Saturday in the afternoon, but it was still a pretty good day. I think we had morning tickets. So, yes, we did go to the stadium, which was lovely.
I remember going to watch the swimming and some gymnastics. I think there was Mary and I. We went to watch a little bit of that, which was fantastic. And we did have once the competition had finished for us, obviously the Olympics was still, there's still a lot more going on. We actually came home, didn't we? And we competed at Hartbury, I think, with some other horses, which was surreal. And it was just like living somebody else's life, to be honest. And I remember going through the station and the driver popping his head out and saying, "Oh, Nicola, we were upgrading you to first class." Well, I'd never been first class before. And so there I was in the train, and it was fabulous. And then we competed and went back for the closing ceremony, which I'm sure you'll ask about in a minute, which was phenomenal and great. We did so many parties. It was truly amazing. And then on the way back from that, when the Olympics had finished, the train was so packed that then I was sitting with other people between carriages, in amongst all of the bags. And the porter came by, not even taking our tickets because it was just so full. And I said, excuse me, would you take a photo of me sitting here? Because for me, it was like an end of the most amazing fortnight, and it was me coming back to my world, to my life, and it was just fantastic to have all those memories and photos and memorabilia, and it was just phenomenal. But also it was quite nice to be almost back to reality, which I suppose it never was it?
What about the knock-on effect of London? Because it feels like there were lots of different opportunities and different things that went on of going to different ceremonies and parties, as you say. Are there any that stand out?
Well,
there's a story here. Come on, guys. I can see them looking at each other going, can we say this? Go on, we're all friends. Share, come on.
Well, we did go to a few good ones. Went out after we went to Buckingham Palace, and then we went out clubbing afterwards, and with the rowers and the sailing lot. They're always up for a good party. So yeah, look, we we did go out and enjoy ourselves and had a good time in London that we wouldn't normally have done. Especially as Nicola said, because it is our sport, but it's also our business. Us having to come back. You think about it now, you think, God, why did we come back for Hartpury? Well, we had to because we had other horses to ride. You have to be very careful that, yes, you're riding one particular owner's horse at the Olympic Games, but you might have a yard full of 10 or 12 other horses also owned by other people. That Hartpury was a very important part of their career. But it would have been also quite lovely now when you look back on it to have gone, actually, I'm just going to have another week off and just stay in London. I wish in hindsight we'd done that. I think it was bonkers that we went off and then came back again. But anyway, that's what we did because we're dedicated to our sport.
We are.
Looking back on it now, 12 years later, and obviously kind of walking down memory lane and picking apart some of those memories and stories and everything else, how would you sum up London? It's the same question I've asked every guest on these Olympic specials, because those 3 words that I'm going to ask you for, it feels like it really encapsulates a lot of emotion, a lot of story, and actually comes together to give us a real feeling for what that Games was like. Tina?
3 words to describe London. Life-changing, magical, memories. I think, yeah. I'm not very good with big words. That's about the stretch
we'll take
of
those.
my
I think that's
vocabulary.
the nail on the head. Nick?
Well, I thought maybe, it was definitely a dream come true. So we'll put a dream. It was definitely magical, and it was just very teamly. It wasn't just the eventing team; it was Team GB, and that was, just on a different level.
It's amazing. It's the most extraordinary.
I don't think that was 3 words. Why use one? I remember you saying once, Nicole, why use 1 word when you could use 100?
Exactly. It's my mantra for life. There is no way I want to use 3 words when I could use 30. Come on. Tina, Nicola, thank you both so much for giving us an insight into what it was like to actually ride at those games, be a part of those games as an athlete. Just the most extraordinary story, and it's been absolutely lovely to hear more about it from your perspective.
Pleasure. It was lovely to relive the memories.
To reminisce.
Wish we could have them again, but we can't.
Yes. I remembered way more than I thought I would.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, Nicole.
No, thank you.
My pleasure. I feel like I'm going to go and stalk YouTube and watch videos of you both galloping around Greenwich Park now.
Yeah, and make sure you do Gangnam style as well then, if you're stalking. Make sure you see it galloping on the stage doing Gangnam style to remember.
Who did that?
William and Mary were meant to be there as well. They left it to us, didn't they?
Yes, the Gangnam style. People still remember that. I was somewhere at the party. Oh, was it Carl Hester's party the other day, and Gangnam style came on, and Carl went, "Come on, you know Gangnam style." I went, "I do not. I know a few movements." That's about it. I couldn't believe that they remembered. Or was it Owen? Somebody remembered Gangnam
Hang on a
style.
second. Just refresh this story. So you and Nicola did Gangnam style, which was a very iconic dance move. If you're a younger listener,
Zara.
go and look it up. And Zara. When? Where? How?
We went up. London. Yeah, in London. It was for children in need. And the rowers did, quite a few of the sports all did varying dance moves to varying things. And William refused to do it. And I think Mary was away, because Mary would definitely have done it if she'd been around, but she wasn't there. So it was down to the 3 of us. And I didn't even know what Gangnam style was until I got there, living under a rock like I do. Look, it was actually jolly funny, wasn't it? And I still got pictures of that as part of the memory.
And they made us push our hats up, didn't they? They were up here so we could see our faces while we're absolute plonkers that we looked.
In our riding gear, doing all the movements and whatever we did. Anyway,
I mean, I feel like they're so I feel like there's so many different ways that could go. Listeners, I don't know about you guys, but I am off to go and Google that. Sod galloping through Greenwich Park. I'm all about the Gangnam Style. Tina, Nicholas, thank you. Enjoy the next few weeks. And it's been an absolute pleasure to look back on London with you.
Thank you. See you soon. Bye.
God, I love that so much. I came off that recording, as I say, massive smile. And it was more about the kind of the insight into what it was like to get to London. And they'd both been through so much. Dee, standout moment for you?
Probably listening to Nicola talk about Piggy, like when she's out of the team and then into the team. Okay, let's be honest. All the athletes are like, how many times have you heard that we're the best of friends, but we have to compete against each other? And I mean, that's loads of sports, to be honest. And everyone says that. There was something about the way Nicola talks about her disappointment for Piggy, even though it was her getting selected, which I don't know, felt different. I've heard versions of that maybe before, but it felt so real. I was almost disappointed that Nicola got selected because Nicola was so disappointed she got selected. And then what made it so magic, I think, is, Piggy saying, "Come on, Nick Knock, this is your moment." I guess for me, Nicole, when you go back then, or because we have the benefit now of like what comes later, with the different moments for Piggy. There are still more down moments to come. Brookfield Innocent, maybe not going to Tokyo. But when you go back, I think to the Sunday afternoon when Piggy won badminton by 1 second from Oliver, I think it helps you understand why that badminton evening was so special. Because Piggy is so special. And why Piggy TV and all of that stuff is so special. And it's interesting because this is not a Piggy show. It's not but again, it goes to like, what are you trying to get to? And hearing them all talking about, like, even like, say, William not doing the Gangnam Style, William being excited about the Olympics, and like Tina, or even Nicola, when she says, that like, her initial reaction is like, "Oh, typical now. I'll probably get selected for the London Olympics and not like a good Olympics." And that bit where she's talking about like how initially it feels like, you don't get to travel the world, and then obviously it becomes a very special one. That was probably a highlight for me, listening to her talking about it. Tina has so many of those little moments too.
It's one of those things, isn't it? We all know Nicola Wilson is possibly the nicest person in eventing. I think this show has just absolutely solidified that for us. We all have kind of lived Piggy's journey, and the Piggy show we did a couple of years ago kind of delved a little bit into the tough times after London. And I think everybody would have feel for her again listening to this. I want to pick up on legacy, because it was the sort of the line of conversation through so many of these interviews. Dee, do you think that the legacy from London has been a success?
I mentioned it at the middle of the part one show. When I listened to Alec Lahore, I was walking around my house nodding. I was thinking, yeah, that makes sense. The legacy lives in people, and that people came in and were trained, and that the legacy lives on, that as you go on, you spread the knowledge, and of course you spread those fences around, and you mind them, and you reboard them, and that bit, yes. But maybe after listening to Tina, and I thought, the fences are going to be gone at some point, and the people move on. That's the funny thing about life, where like the learning is real, and the opportunity to spread that learning is real, and I'm not missing that. And that is a legacy. It's just a bit more kind of meta in terms of how you have to think about it. It's a bit more nebulous. You can't hold it. There is something about Bromont where when you go there, you do a dressage test and you look up and there's the Olympic rings on the hill. And I do think there is something about bricks and mortar legacy that reminds people that actually you're in an Olympic area. We work with what we have. Like, it might not or wasn't really possible, I guess, to do that in London in terms of keeping it in such a central place. But for so many kids in London, I was with a thing there recently, Nicole, around equine therapy for children, like, who, for loads of different challenges and needs. And like, in the middle of London, if there was still something that they could go to, no matter how small, that like the Olympians had been in, like, I do think it would be a legacy. So I don't want to sound too basic in that I've not heard what Alec is talking about, or I've not seen all those Olympic fences that have gone on. But I also wish there was something more permanent that maybe will still be there in 30 years or 40 years or 100 years, to be able to say, do you remember London 2012? And do you remember X or Y happening? And even for the people that don't remember, they'll say that's Olympic House or Olympic Field or whatever it might have been. So my overriding, probably having listened to it all, is I do think that that we'll have to work hard to make sure that the legacy, maybe that's wrong. Shows like this help it because you get you back into it a little bit. What do you think?
I think the thing that stands out for me is it's eventing's one opportunity, the Olympic Games. We know that eventing in the Olympics isn't quite eventing the same as it is at Badminton and Burghley, and it's different. And ultimately the format changes in order to keep it within the Games. We're seeing 3 in a team in Paris, and a lot of London feels like what we're going to see in Paris. The kind of the magnificent sight that you're not going to see an equestrian centre pop up in front of the Palace of Versailles, for example. It's a little bit more on the outskirts of the Olympic Games in Paris, but there's a lot of parallels. The bit that stands out for me in London, there are so few opportunities for eventing and equestrian sports to be on a stage in front of a global audience that is captivated by what is unfolding. To have equestrian sports and particularly eventing, given the fact that actually you need much more infrastructure in the inner circle of an Olympics, I think is an extraordinary experience, and it is a different legacy. It's not necessarily the physical one. And that for me is what really, really stands out. I think that's been incredibly, incredibly special. And everybody we've heard from on this show talks about the people and the atmosphere and how part of the Games they felt. Now, maybe there would have been the space for something like around Windsor or kind of like maybe there was something else, but actually it was a massive, massive success in terms of everything apart from the physical bits that have been left, which there aren't any. So for me, I think, yes, it's different to some, but I still see it as a massive success in that respect.
There's no doubt. And to be honest, if you were to change it to, Windsor or Hickstead, something happened like that, you just don't, as you talk about, the inner circle, the impact, the butterfly effect, I think they call it. If you were to change one thing, you don't know that all of the other bits would have worked as well. Yeah, I don't want to sound like I'm missing the point of it, because I think, it's a very important, everybody, nearly, like a lot of people talk about, go to those 3 words that people talked about, but legacy is something that comes up again and again as a central theme to London. So yeah, I need to be kind of careful how I express it, because I want to be very respectful of that. I feel when you're talking to people, it's so special to them. But what I want to make sure, and why these shows were important to us, is that actually for people who are walking into the sport, who are 12 now, in the way that maybe I was thinking about Athens or something like that, where like I need to hold on to it, to see it, to feel it, to tell me about it. I want to make sure that London doesn't flow off into something that was so special for the different personalities and people who got to experience it. Tina talking about herself and her daughter Izzy is a really interesting way of looking at, because she talks initially about like how special it would be for Izzy to ride around, you know, at the Olympic ring at Hickstead or whatever it may be. And then she's like, but actually I realized it's pretty unique and special that I'm the only person that'll really get to do it kind of as it goes along. And I think it's all kind of summed up in that, like in that there's something very special about what Tina and Nicola got to experience, because it'll never be done again. And the same for Alec in terms of building it and bringing it together, in terms of, you know, having to raise the height to get the flat surface, having to make a success of, you know, not touching the ground, certain ways of doing cables, all that. That'll never be done again. So it's so special that they all did that and brought it all together to life and showcased it to the world. But it's gone now. And maybe that's what makes it so special. Maybe that's what makes it even more special. I don't know. That's the question. It's definitely not an answer for me. It's definitely not it's definitely not a yes or a no. And I hear what they say about filling up, leaving legacy with people and then sending those people around the world. And I think that's something that possibly or probably more impactful in some ways than bricks and mortar. Really interesting conversation, Nicole. I don't know the answer, but it's one to think about.
I don't think there is. There is a right answer. I think it's very opinion led, and actually how we feel today might be different to how we feel tomorrow. Because and I imagine the sort of discussion that went into making those sorts of decisions was huge. For me, reflecting on London has been one of my favourite shows, probably because it's the one in most recent memory, and because there felt like this enormous success story around it after, you know, everybody was kind of doubting it in the first instance. I would say, listeners, I actually went, after talking to Nicola and Tina, I went onto YouTube. You can find 6 and a bit hours of London cross country on YouTube, and you can relive it all again. And it's incredible. Like the terrain, you forget the terrain. It was absolute roller coaster in Greenwich Park. There's some brilliant moments in there, and you can also find Gangnam Style. Just putting that out there as well. Might put the link in the show notes for your own viewing pleasure. Tina, Nicola and Zara will be delighted with me for sharing that one again. These shows have been an absolute pleasure. I would just say that when we were talking about it, we skipped over Hong Kong. We were only going to do 3. We only really had time to do 3 in the build up to Paris. And we didn't do Hong Kong. And I feel really bad looking back, because we did Atlanta, we've done Sydney, we've done Athens. We skipped Hong Kong and we've gone straight to London. So I feel like Hong Kong, we're going to go back and revisit it at some point.
Yeah, don't give it all at once, Nicole. Like we've got really good partners.
People wanting more.
Well, like I want to put you into the headspace of like Nicole Brown 2027. You know, you'll be a little bit wiser, a little bit grayer. I want you to think like, okay, getting on the phone to Jane. What'll I do? Be like, Jane, do you want to do a show about the Paris and LA 28, or not Paris? Do you want to do LA 28? We could talk about Hong Kong. We could talk about Rio. Jane would be like, yeah.
Do you know the one?
Have you not done Hong Kong? No, we didn't do it. We left it. She'd be like, yeah, that's so clever.
Let's go and do it. Do you know the one I'm really looking forward to doing in 10 years' time? Because
Rio.
People, as we said at the start of these shows, no, Tokyo. You have to, maybe it'll be longer than 10 years. You have to give it time for people to talk and for it to sink in and for it to feel, you know.
For all the PTSD to pass.
Yeah, basically. So Tokyo in the future, one day down the line, listeners, will happen, but not for a long time. Dee, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for doing it with me, and listeners, thanks for coming along for the journey, because it's been an absolute privilege to go back and talk to so many amazing people with so many different stories in the sport and get their take on their Olympic Games. And there are so many more people we could have talked to. There are so many other different threads we could have pulled on. But really, really hope that you've enjoyed these shows as much as we have. Dee, can you sum London up in 3 words?
I always think when you're doing it, when you were asking for your 3 words, I was always like, oh, I would hate if she asked me that. That is a really tricky one. 3 words for London. Great British sport. I think there was actually conversations around sport, to put sport on in the middle of London. I think it was really, really British without being jingoistic or, too harsh in terms of that Union flag everywhere. And it was great. I mean, I think you hear Nicola Wilson and Tina, both quite different people. Great friends. Who's it? Maybe it's not for me to say they're different, but like they definitely come across different in that they both go to like kind of magic in terms of like what it was. Like I think one of magic memories, and I'm trying to think of their words now off the top of my head. It's a while since I finished that interview, but I think they both talk about being magic. And I think if you can capture that level of emotion, you can capture that level of spectacle, that level of home and nation pride, and still put on great sport. Disappointed with silver medals, watching they all talk about Super Saturday and the other sports. They all talk about the dressage, talk about the jumping. Sport was real here for British equestrian, and they delivered on a home stage. Yeah, I don't know if those words go together at all, but that's kind of where I would go. Very proud. I was nearly said it. Proud to be British. You should be very proud to be British. Is where I'm going.
we nearly cracked it.
Imagine that snip. Imagine that getting heard again. No,
that would have
I think
played out.
you should all be very proud to be British. Listening back to that show.
I think for me, iconic. There were so many iconic pictures, and Sue did a work of art on that cross country course and kind of pulling together some imagination things that I think take my hat off to her. Absolutely extraordinary. So iconic. I think I'm going to go with British as well. It felt very, very British in the build up to it, but actually the success, everybody was very proud to be British. So I'm going to steal that one as well. And then success. I picked it up at the start of this show. It feels like it was a success. So they are my 3. Listeners, it has been an absolute pleasure. I want to go and do it all again. We are going to go and do it all again because Paris is nearly here. Connolly's Red Mills, massive thank you to Jane, the team, everybody who believed in these Olympic stories. They've been massive supporters of the podcast for a good number of years now. We've worked with them for quite a long time, and when we go to them with an idea and say, we've thought of this, what do you think? They back us wholeheartedly. So thank you for the trust, and we hope that they've enjoyed the show as well. Listeners, we would love to hear your London memories. I know plenty of you will have been there. So perhaps we can share the love. Share this podcast. Tag us in your London memories, and we will go through some of them on an upcoming show. There's going to be plenty of opportunity to talk about the Olympics in the next few weeks. So we would love to hear your favourite moments as well, your standout moments. But for now, a massive thank you to everybody who's contributed to the show. Rosie, who has worked like an absolute trooper in pulling it all together, because it's a mammoth editing task as well. And we will have more in the Olympic stories in the future. Watch this space.